Ireland or Luxembourg, if you plan to enter Europe with your investment strategies, the domicile of establishment of a fund is a choice you will have to make pretty early in the process. In this video, we talk about whether Ireland or Luxembourg is the best domicile to set up an ELTIF II in 2025. The reform of the European Long-Term Investment Funds regulation entered into force in January 2024 and is working. Recent data from industry association in Europe backs this conclusion, showing the number of ELTIF II launches steadily increasing since. Many more managers willing to enter the long-term investment funds arena are grappling with the choice of the right domicile where to establish their ELTIF IIs. Historically, investors in continental and southern Europe have always had more appetite for long-term investment strategies. And this is why under ELTIF I, we witnessed a strange phenomenon with long-term investment funds being launched also in, let's call them, atypical domiciles like Italy and France. Because we know that at least with UCITS, the choice of the domicile of establishment of a fund has always been between Luxembourg or Ireland. A good chunk of ELTIF I were mostly dedicated to domestic audiences and one market only. And that explains the choice for these unusual domiciles like Italy and France, where you would not set up a fund if you wanted cross-border distribution. The rest of ELTIF I's, we are talking about the funds with a more varied audience in mind spread across multiple countries in Europe, were all launched out of Luxembourg. Ireland, it's at the first round out, with little to no launches of ELTIFs established there. So you may think that Luxembourg will continue to be the domicile of choice to establish an ELTIF II also in 2025, and that's a no-brainer. Data seems to suggest that the number of ELTIF II launches out of Luxembourg continues to grow, but not so fast, because Ireland introduced a wild card that might as well tip the scales in its favor and increase considerably the number of ELTIF II launched from there. In the investment fund world, Ireland and Luxembourg carved out over time their own niche to attract fund launches. When it comes to UCITS, the main driver to choose for one domicile over the other has always been mostly related to audience of investors. Managers willing to distribute in southern and continental Europe have over time preferred Luxembourg structures for UCITS, whilst Irish UCITS were mostly set up to target investor audiences in the Anglo-Saxon and Northern European countries. US managers have traditionally preferred Ireland for the commonality of language and business culture, as well as the forthcoming approach of its regulators. Nowadays, most of the UCITS ETFs are launched out of Ireland, but they keep with a better arsenal of tools when it comes to partnership and other similar corporate structures. Luxembourg became the domicile of choice for alternative investment strategies, and even Americans had to conform to a different way to do business and choose Luxembourg when they had to launch alternative investment strategies in Europe. And this likely explains why the reputation built by Luxembourg in the alternative investment space made it the most immediate choice also as a domicile for ELTIF II. But the Central Bank of Ireland has now introduced a 24-hour approval process for ELTIFs targeted at professional and qualified investors. And this is one of the most aggressive procedural innovations we have seen recently. Under this new model, the approval of certain ELTIFs can be done in one single business day. Luxembourg still leads in volume of ELTIFs II launched, but suffers from sometimes unpredictable approval timelines for new funds. And for managers needing to move fast, Ireland has offered a significant shortcut, and the industry has noticed and overwhelmingly supported the fast-track process. There are increasingly more ELTIFs launched out of Ireland, with many more likely to come soon. What are the main features of the new fast-track Central Bank of Ireland 24-hour approval process for ELTIF II? Before we dive into it, it is worth mentioning that ELTIF II regulation introduced a distinction between ELTIFs for professional investors and ELTIFs purely for retail investors. Ireland is also one of these member states in Europe which introduced in its own legislation a specific client categorization that does exist in other member states in Europe, but not yet at a European level. we are talking about qualified investors. Under Irish regulation, we have now ELTIFs for qualified investors, and these are professional clients under MiFID II, person assessed by a regulated entity as having sufficient expertise, experience and understanding in the strategies, or person who certify in writing to have knowledge and experience to evaluate the merits and risks of an investment or own a business involving acquisition or disposal of property similar to the one held by the ELTIF. Only the ELTIF II for professional and qualified investors will be eligible for the fast-track 24-hour process introduced by the Central Bank of Ireland. And these qualified investor ELTIFs, notwithstanding the fast-track 24-hour process, will have to continue to abide to all the restrictions imposed on retail ELTIF II. Here we refer to producing a PRIPS kit to come along with the prospectus, as well as the appointment of a facilities agent. For what concerns ELTIF II that are purely for retail investors, this will continue to be subject to a more traditional authorization process from the Central Bank of Ireland, where we will have at least one round of comments from the Central Bank of Ireland on a submission of a prospectus before an ELTIF II can be approved. This is to continue to ensure that where the concerns are higher for investor protection, like in the case of ELTIF II offered to a retail audience, these are tackled appropriately and the review of the fund documentation is made in an appropriate timeframe. The question that everyone is asking now is how the introduction of the Central Bank of Ireland 24-hour fast-track process for ELTIF II approval will affect the choice of domicile in Europe to launch an ELTIF II going forward. Luxembourg has a lot of reputation gained over time in the space of alternative investment strategies. We may want to expect that ELTIF II will continue to be launched predominantly out of Luxembourg, but not necessarily all types of ELTIF II. We may want to believe that managers willing to launch ELTIF IIs for retail investors, the equivalent of the UCITS but in the long-term investment space, will continue to choose Luxembourg. That will be the case especially for ELTIF II dedicated to an audience of retail investors located in the southern and continental Europe. Ireland, with the introduction of the Central Bank of Ireland 24-hour fast-track approval process for ELTIF II, wants clearly to carve out a niche for itself and be the domicile of choice where to launch an ELTIF, not for all alternative investment managers, but for those who have in mind a very specific investor audience in Europe, the one of the private banks and wealth managers, which would adapt themselves much more naturally to the qualified investor definition and the qualified investor ELTIF II for which the fast-track approval process was meant for in the first place. And here we have to bear in mind that these investors are still treated as retail investors under European regulation. So even if there is a fast-track approval process in Ireland, this ELTIF II will have to continue to provide a PRIPS kit and offer local facilities. If you made it up to this part of the video, I wanted to thank you and I wanted to invite you to hit like to the video and subscribe to the channel. There is more to come on European distribution. As always, thank you for watching and stay tuned.